All right. Thank you, Ken. Uh, Ken, can you quickly remind me what time do I need to stop talking so that you can move on?
So what we'll do is this. If you stop at 7, then from 7 to 7:15, we can do the break where we practice the skills that you have shared with everybody, and that would work out perfectly.
Perfect. I will go to the top of the hour. Thank you, Ken, for having me. Thank you, chapter members, for taking part of your evening so that we can explore this idea, which is that as a leader, that you should be telling stories. And so this is a big part of the work that I do in the world. I go around and I go around the world and help leaders at big organizations tell stories. And it's a really simple idea. And the idea is that when we tell stories, when we use this language that is narrative, that something different happens, that it creates a different kind of connection. And so for the urgent work that you're doing, we can use that. We can take this unique connection that narrative language creates. We can take that connection and move that into more parts of the work that we can do so that we can advance the work and align the system and develop the team. And Ken mentioned that this is communication skills. Yes, it is. And it's even more than that. This is leadership skills. This is organizational development. And so I'm going to share with you some ideas today of how you can start and quickly begin bringing this skill into the work that you're doing right now. And so this image that you're looking at is a group that I worked with. This is L'Oreal, the beauty and makeup company. This is in Paris. This was right before COVID. And I love this picture. There's so much happening in this picture. They're telling stories. They're building story into their leadership profiles all across the system. And so what do you see happening in this picture? What do you notice about this? And by the way, this is a conversation. I'm going to share a lot of ideas with you, but you're welcome to raise your hand if you want to make a comment, if you want to interrupt. You can also use the chat window. Ken is going to help me keep an eye on that if you have any observations or questions in the chat. So the question is, what do you notice in this picture? Engagement is a good word.
I
Yes.
see listeners getting pulled in, active listening.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I showed this picture to my wife, and she said, I can kind of feel what it feels like to be sitting in that circle. And I kind of knew what she meant, right? There's a lot of emotion cues in here. We talk about leaning in. And people are physically, bodily leaning in. So this technology that is story creates this engagement, this animated conversation, this active listening in a way that your PowerPoint slides never will. And in a way that your Excel spreadsheets that we project up on the wall will never create this kind of engagement, this connection. Story with emotion content is uniquely able to do this. And so today I want to give you some ideas of some stories that you could be telling as part of your work. And a lot of people who do story work will talk about how do you tell a good story. And that's a good conversation to have, but that's not the strategic piece. That's not where I start. I start with selection. Which stories should you be telling as part of the work that you're bringing forward? And so one of the really cool resources that I use in this, all my clients love this. It's called the Leadership Story Deck. It's what it sounds like. It's a deck of cards with dozens of ideas of stories that you could be telling and connecting to the work. These are stories that you have. And I bet you're not telling a lot of these stories. And I'll show you another team. This is Accenture. This is in Munich, Germany. And this was right after COVID, actually. And this is actually a cybersecurity team, or about half of them are cybersecurity at Accenture, Germany. And they're telling stories as a way of engaging not just their markets, but even engaging the organization in the work that they're doing, because they have to advocate internally for what is the value that we're bringing to the organization. We're not just a cost center. There's something more that we're doing. How are we telling the story internally to create the engagement? And so with this team, we selected cards and began developing the stories around them. And these are all cards that are from the story deck. And the idea is that once you select these different story types, and then you start sequencing them, and then you start delivering this as an engaging message, it sounds a little bit like a TED Talk. You know, we've got these story assets, and then in between the stories, we put slides and data. And based on Accenture's experience, I'm going to share a few stories that you could be telling. And we're going to start with this first one. And it's called A Leader with Conviction. There's a reason I'm here. A leader with conviction. The why I'm here story. And the idea of this story is that this is a personal story. It's a story about you. So we want to see you in this story. And some leaders struggle with this. You know, I hear a lot of leaders say things like, "Oh, it's not about me. It's about the work. You know, it's about the mission. It's about the client." No, it is about you, because you have stepped into this role that is leadership, this role that is influence. And so we're looking at you. You are the embodiment of the mission. You're the embodiment of the values of the project. And so show us you. Let us see what you care about. Let us see why you believe in this organization, in this role. Why do you care about this project or this new thing that we're bringing forth? Tell us a story that connects you to it. The idea is that when we see your belief, that belief is socially transferable, your belief becomes our belief. So one thing I do want to do today is show you some examples of what these stories can sound like. So let's start with the why I'm here story. And a lot of people ask me, they say, "Dave, how did you get into this work?" I mean, it is kind of a sweet gig, you know, flying around the world and asking leaders to tell stories. It's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And so people say, how did you get into this? So back in the early 2000s, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. Right now I live in Nashville, Tennessee. But I was living in Atlanta back in the early 2000s, and I was doing corporate communications work, and I got a call from the Coca-Cola company, which is headquartered in Atlanta. And they called me and said, "Hey, Dave, we have a communications challenge." And here's what the communications challenge was. Coca-Cola at the time was early in this transformation journey, system-wide across the entire enterprise, to become what was known at the time as a learning organization. And some of you might remember the work of Peter Senge. Maybe you read his book called The Fifth Discipline. It was a best-selling book back in the 90s and early 2000s. And Coca-Cola had made a commitment to transform their entire enterprise into a learning organization. And they said early in the work, "Dave, we've run into a problem." And here's the problem. The problem is nobody understands what we're talking about. You know, when we say we're going to be a learning organization, people go, "What?" And then if we say, "Go read The Fifth Discipline," you know, it's kind of academic. It's this thick book, and it's systems theory, and it's mental models, and geeks like us love that stuff. But not everybody wants to, you know, geek out on the book. And they said, "Can you create a communication solution to help people understand what it means that we're becoming a learning organization?" I said, "Yeah, of course I can help you with that." And then I went home and had a panic attack because I had no idea how to do this. And so just out of my despair, I created a document on my computer and I wrote the words, "Once upon a time, there was a wolf." And I started writing a story, and I wrote this crazy story about a flock of sheep that outwits a pack of hungry wolves. And in the process, they display the characteristics of a learning organization. And then I called a buddy of mine who is a children's book illustrator, and I said, hey, Bobby, you got to help me out. Draw me some funny pictures of some sheep and some wolves. And so I dropped these into this manuscript. I titled it Outlearning the Wolves. And I brought this back to the Coca-Cola company, and I was sure that it was going to get me fired. I mean, it was kind of weird, you know, it had snarky Saturday Night Live jokes in it and crazy images, and it didn't get me fired. And in fact, a publisher picked it up, and since then, Outlearning the Wolves has traveled all over the world. It's in about 12 different languages now, and it keeps selling. That was more than 20 years ago, and people still keep buying this crazy book. And I had no idea that was going to work. You know, that kind of made me pause and say, what just happened here? This crazy idea I thought was going to get me fired instead has taken off and gone all over the world. And so that was really the moment that I said, all right, there's something about this language that is story that has a different impact. And that was really the moment where I really committed myself to this line of inquiry. And since then I've been exploring story and all of its applications in organizations. So that's one of my why I'm here stories. That's one of the stories. I have others, but that's one of the stories that brings me into this work of storytelling. And so now that I've shared this story with you, now you know some things about me. You know, I don't know what kinds of connections you're making. You know, maybe you're thinking, this guy comes up with some unconventional solutions. And if you are thinking that, then good. I like that. I want you to think that. That is kind of part of the branding. You know, when I think about my personal brand, that's part of it, right? Or maybe you're concluding, hey, he's been doing this work for a really long time. And yeah, that's true too. I want you to know that. Or maybe you're thinking, Coca-Cola, he's bringing this to some big organizations. Yeah, I want you to know that too. And so now, instead of listing that stuff, bullet points, you know, big organizations, 20 years of experience, I don't have to do all of that stuff. Instead, I simply tell you a story, and you start coming to some conclusions on your own. And that's so much better. So I'm going to pause there. In a moment, I'm going to show you some other story types that you could be telling. But before I do, you know, I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to make comments or ask questions. Are there any observations or questions or thoughts about this? Again, you're welcome to raise your hand. I think that everybody probably knows how to go down into the reactions menu. See how I just raised my hand? You're welcome to do that, and then I'll see you and you can ask a question. Or if there's any comments in the chat window, I see somebody ask if I was behind the new Coke. No, I wasn't, but I actually know the strategy team that was, and I actually know that story. It is a story of systemic institutional failure and learning. It's actually a really fascinating story. But no, not my fault. You can't blame me for new Coke. Any comments or questions before we move on?
Oh, somebody wants to purchase the deck already. So somebody asked, where can they purchase the deck?
If you're in the US, it is on Amazon. And if you're not in the US, you can log into the US Amazon store and have it shipped internationally. You can also go to my website, storytellingleader.com, and get one there.
We got another question here. Does a story you tell change based on your audience?
Oh, absolutely. Audience changes everything. And a great exercise that I do with teams sometimes is they'll tell the story, you know, as if they're telling it to each other. And then I'll say, okay, tell the story again, but this time you're telling it to the CEO. Ooh, that changes everything. Okay, well, what are we going to change? How does that affect our language? How does that affect the insights that we draw out? How does that affect the invitation that we extend at the end of the story? So yes, it changes everything. Is it in French? The story deck is not in French. There's some other resources I have that are available in French. I'll show those to you at the end of the conversation. I see Pedro's question. How do we introduce a story to an intimidating leader? One of the beliefs that people have is that, well, here in my data organization, people are really smart. They don't have a lot of patience for this story stuff. And that's demonstrably not true. Your intimidating leader is still a human being. And when we're talking about data, you can't talk about data without telling a story. Right? If I show you a financial graph and there's one of those, that squiggly line, and then the line goes way down here, and someone says, "Hey, why did the number drop? What happened here in this line?" You're going to say, "Oh, well, that was back when we implemented our new marketing strategy." You'll be right back in story. So the bad belief is that data leaders or hard driving, if you do DISC, the D leaders, that they don't have patience for this. That's not true. They want you to tell the story, but they want you to be intentional and they want you to be strategic. And so that's the work that I do. Any others?
Yeah, you got some more questions.
Okay, I'll take one or two more and then I'm going to keep going, okay?
Okay. All right. What are the indicators that story is working to continue further?
On Zoom, it's hard because it's, when they talk about neuroception, your neurobiology subconsciously is picking up information in the room. I can't read the energy in the room on Zoom. I see like 4 faces up at the top and I can't tell if you're smiling or if you like it or not. When you're in the room, it's easy. It's palpable. You can feel the energy. You feel it in your body. When it's working, you know it is because it feels good. You start having fun. You start seeing your audience lean in like you saw in the L'Oreal picture. People start going, ooh, right. So it's unmistakable when it's working. You know that it is.
All right. Last question. Then you can,
Okay.
how can leaders identify the right stories to tell that resonate with the teams and drive desired outcomes?
That's exactly the conversation we're having. I'll give you some more ideas about that. It does start with awareness of what are the kinds of stories that I can be telling. Because most salespeople are telling stories of a customer like you, which is great, but those aren't the only stories that you could be telling. You have lots of other stories that you could be telling, right? So this conversation is to expand your awareness and expand the palette of stories that you're thinking about. So to that point, let me share another one with you. We just talked about the why I'm here story, the leader with conviction. Again, put yourself in the story. This feels weird to some people, but we want to see you. We don't form empathy connections with the technology. We form connections with you. So let us see you. Next, card number 11 in the story deck. This is one of my favorite stories that I bet you're not telling, and it's called the Eureka story. Some people call it the process story. And when I work with technology teams, we really focus on this one. You're missing lots of opportunities to tell this story. And the idea behind this story type is as you're doing the work, we get really fixated on the product, the new offering, the new feature, the new user interface in the app. We get really fixated on that, and we should. That's what we're working on all the time, and that's what we talk about when we bring forward. And what this story would suggest is that you kind of step back and peel back the curtain. And again, stories are about people. Let us see the people. Let us see the team. What did it look like when the team was creating this thing? Show us what it looks like when this team is solving tough problems with ingenuity and creativity. And this is one of the things they're saying at Accenture is if we come forward with a new innovation, it's only a matter of, they used to say months, now it's weeks before Booz Allen or Boston Consulting or Capgemini or whoever also has this innovation. It's harder to win on innovation. But what they can't copy is this team. and how this team solves problems and this team's ingenuity. So show us that. We need to hear these people stories. So let me show you an example of what this one can sound like. And for the Eureka Moments of Inspiration story, this example, I'm going to do a video on this one. And Ken, once I start this, tell me if there's sound problems.
Yeah.
I think it should be okay. I do this a lot over Zoom. So if
Okay.
you recognize this image, this lady, her name is Dr. Amy Edmondson. And if that name rings a bell, it's because she's the Harvard researcher behind a really popular idea right now called psychological safety. Are any of you talking about this in your teams or in your organizations? Psychological safety. It's an idea that got a lot of attention a couple years ago when Google did some internal research to say, why are some teams consistently more innovative than others? And Google being Google said, we're going to crack the code on this with data. And Google came back and said, it's this one capability. It's this one thing that differentiates some teams. And it's this capability called psychological safety. And of course, when Google says that, Forbes picks it up and suddenly everybody's talking about it. It's really great stuff. So check it out. I'm going to share with you a video of Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard introducing her research and her methodology into this concept that has become so popular. So as I play this, let me know what stands out to you and what you notice about this. And Ken, I'm going to be watching you. If there's any problems with the sound or the video, just kind of give me a thumbs down, or if it's all good, give me a thumbs up and I won't intervene. So this is Dr. Amy Edmondson introducing her research into psychological safety. Tell me what you notice.
I got into this. I got interested in this actually quite by accident. Let me tell you how it happened. I joined a team of mostly physicians and nurses, and the job of that team was to find out, to assess, they hoped conclusively, what the actual rate of medication errors was in, let's say, some modern tertiary care hospitals. My little part was very simple. I was going to ask the question and answer the question of, do better teams, better hospital patient care teams, make fewer mistakes? These were the data that they came up with. Now, these are adverse drug events, errors, just called them medication errors, that were deemed to be based on human error, expressed in terms of errors per 1,000 patient days. Now, here's where the story gets a little weird. I got the data, waited patiently. I got the data on the teams. I got the data on the errors. And I ran my analyses. And what did I find? The results were exactly the opposite of what I had expected. It appeared that better teams were making more mistakes, not fewer. Now, from the point of view of a young researcher wanting to publish a paper, this was a real problem. Never mind the other problems, right? And so this was a problem. No, this was a puzzle. So I sat down to think, why else might I thought about the need for coordination between physicians and nurses? I thought about the need for teamwork on the fly, for speaking up, for double checking. And I thought maybe, in a kind of blinding flash of the obvious, I thought maybe the better teams aren't making more mistakes. Maybe they're more willing to discuss them. What if the better teams have a climate of openness that allows them to report and even get to the bottom of these things? I call these special workplaces ones that have psychological safety. Now, I'll define psychological safety as a belief that it's absolutely okay, in fact, it's expected, to speak up with concerns, with questions, with ideas, with mistakes.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. What stood out to you about that? What did you notice? What stood out to you? What did you notice? Again, you're welcome to raise your hand or put some comments down in the chat window. Jonathan, what did you notice about that?
For what value? I'll put it in the form of a question and see if it makes sense. For what values of better? One of what immediately I thought of is you have to properly define your terms, and she didn't define what better meant.
Okay, is that a problem?
Absolutely. I mean, I think without defining terms and defining what better meant, um, frankly, the story is lost on me
Mhm.
because not enough facts. We don't know what better means to her in order to understand whether we would agree with that definition of better.
Beautiful. I love that you're digging into the details of the research and you're saying, tell me more, which personally, I see that as a plus, not a liability of the approach. When people tell stories and the audience says, hey, wait a minute, go back. Tell me more. I missed something there. That's a good moment. Stories drive dialogue. Story is always the beginning of the conversation. And the other thing I would say to the point that you just made is, somebody asked about audience a little bit earlier. The audience is not you. I mean, this is a really smart group of data people. And if you noticed on the stage, that was a TED stage. And so it's a more general popular audience. And so she's not there to go deep into the methodology. And if she was speaking to your group, I have a feeling that her stories might sound a little bit different. So maybe your critique of the story goes back to the point of audience that we've already talked about, right? Good. Other thoughts? You're welcome to raise your hand, or Ken, is there stuff popping up in the chat?
people, you're getting a lot of responses here. Adam said, set up the safety by admitting her own mistake.
Mhm. Yeah, so she makes herself a little bit vulnerable here, right? I know a lot of leaders who don't want to do that. I got it wrong. I did not understand what was happening here. I'm a Harvard researcher. I want you to see how smart I am. But she allows us to see her kind of scrambling a little bit, and that makes the story more interesting. It makes her more credible, not less credible when we see that. Yeah, what else, Ken?
Lior says, strange that she is in a circle and hands behind her back talking about safety. So she's looking at her posture and how she's presenting, which is interesting.
Are you saying that the hands behind the back is that a safety position, or is that a I think of this as self-protective, and I think of this as safe. Is that how you're interpreting it?
Lior, you want to speak up?
So no, I think I would interpret that more as anxiety than safe.
Okay. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I tell people my work is not presentation skills training. I'm not going to make you a better public speaker. There are people who are really good at that. I'm not interested in that. I have seen leaders step up and be nervous with their voice trembling, or I work with a lot of international teams where English is the second language and people stutter through the story. But if they tell the right story at the right time, the results can be transformational. So yeah, I agree. She's not the greatest speaker in the world. And I'm okay with that. When you do this right, for all of you listening, a lot of people hear the word storytelling and go, oh, I have to be a performer. No, you don't. Don't change your voice when you do this. Don't perform. Don't try to act like somebody else. When you do this right, you should sound like you. A more effective version of you, but it should sound like you, right? Ken, others.
The only other one, a lot of them are repetitive, but Kurt said that feeling safe to take interpersonal risks, to speak up, to disagree openly, surface concerns without fear or negative repercussions. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So now he's getting into the theory of psychological safety. You're already starting to, in your own mind, define what this framework and this concept is. So again, this is engagement. We're thinking about the topic. And the thing I like about this is, how she ended with that slide that was the definition? Most leaders I work with would have started the presentation with that slide.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. Today I'm here to talk to you about psychological safety. Here's how I define the term. Let me show you what my research methodology was. Let me bring you into the details of it. Let me show you what my, but she doesn't do that. She takes 2 minutes of your precious time to say, back when I was a young researcher, right? And she brings us through all this hoo-ha of her story. Why does she do this? To engage you, to draw you in. And now you're asking questions. Now you're saying, I want to know more. I want to understand your methodology. I want to, right? So 2 minutes. And another concern people have is that story takes too long. You can do a lot in about 2 minutes, 90 seconds, 60 seconds. You can create emotion and connection. Arcana, I see your hand is raised. You're on mute, Arcana. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I noticed that as she started her talk, right, she went right into, she did try to grab the attention by starting like a storytelling, but the idea of what she is measuring was not defined. There were no parameters and things defined on which she was doing an hypothesis saying that I feel better teams will make less mistakes, right? But what is the parameter? Is it more collaborative? They have to be more cohesive. What are the 5, 6 different parameters on which I'm measuring what makes a team better? That definition was not there.
See that? It's like you get a bunch of IT people together and we need metrics.
No, I'm loving the response of this group. Show me the data, bring me deeper into it. And again, I always tell people the story is not the end of the conversation. The story is always the beginning of the conversation. This is why salespeople love this. If the salesperson tells this story to the customer and the customer says, well, wait a minute, what were the parameters of the study? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you about that, right? Now we're having a dialogue. We love that. Now people are actively soliciting you for more information. They're not trying to shut down the conversation. They're opening it up wider. This is as they say, a feature, not a bug of the technology, right? So if you liked that story, if that story worked for you, and also the Coca-Cola story and the outlearning the wolves, if you liked the stories, then the science says that something really interesting is happening here. We have would it be an MRI, the brain scan? We know what your brain looks like on story. And if we were to roll you into the MRI and say, all right, tell a story, and then scan your brain, and researchers have done this. This is an image from a guy at MIT, Yuri Hasson. No, not MIT, he's at Princeton. The image on the left, what we see is the brain is active. Different parts of the brain are active when we tell stories with emotion content in it. And then here's the fascinating part. If we then scan the brain of the audience listening to the story, we see that the audience's brain is lit up in a pattern nearly identical to the teller's. And the theory of this would be called neural coupling. Some people call it neural entrainment. It's like at some level, your brain as the listener changes shape to become like the brain of the teller. Right? Like, you know how when you binge watch Breaking Bad or The Crown or whatever it is you're watching on Netflix, you know how you kind of lose awareness of your living room, and right, and you stop noticing the frame of your television. It's like you're in the story at some level. That's neural coupling. This is a very powerful connection between brains when this happens. And what's important about this is that data doesn't create this connection. Your slides will never create neural coupling connection between speaker and audience. Only stories with that emotion content will create this connection. And when I work with groups, I tell them, this is the prize. When we do this work, this is what we're looking for, is this really specific connection between brains. There's some times when we don't need it. If we're just crunching the data, then maybe we don't need to tell stories. It depends. But when the time comes to engage the world in the work that you're doing, we need those stories. We need that connection. So let me pause there. We only have a few minutes left. I do have just a couple more ideas to share with you, but other questions or observations? Ken, what's popping up that I need to respond to?
Do you have objective research that shows that connection between engagement and shows the connection between engagement and storytelling?
And again, just sorry to explain that a little bit, Dave or David, I don't know which you prefer.
Yeah.
I have a colleague, and either one's fine, thank you. I happen to prefer Jonathan, that's why I ask, I'm aware of it. Speaking of which, I'm always all about telling stories. I have a colleague who gets particularly annoyed whenever stories get told. He considers them to be a waste of time by definition, where I make the argument you just made. And I would love to be able to point to objective research that shows that connection. Maybe we should connect on LinkedIn, and I'll ask you about it there, because that may be, I don't want to take the last 6 minutes of your talk on this one conversation. But I'm all about telling stories, and to me, especially on Zoom, it's all about, if all you do is are meeting people on Zoom, you've got to have some way to draw them in, and stories do that to me.
Right.
For me, I should say.
So the answer is there's so much research. How much time do you have? We have research on how does story affect retention. Like you remember more if it's in a story. How does story affect how much money people are willing to pay for your services? They will pay for more if you tell
products. I sell crap. I get it.
Right. They've hooked people up to heart monitors. We know what's happening to spikes in blood sugar and cortisol and oxytocin when you tell stories. We know how stories will align a system for movement. There's an enormous amount of research on this. So I'm happy to share some with you. Do find me on LinkedIn. I would love to have that conversation.
I told you this was an active audience.
I love it. I love it. We only have 5 minutes left. This is flying by. Oh my gosh.
I can't even, it's going too fast for me. Hold on a second. Aaron has a funny, let me see his. He says, to put it in ISC2 terms, I was able to better use the CISSP, which is one of our certifications, for dummies than I could the Sean Harris guide, because she added so much narrative to her study guide that I lost focus. So for him, he just needed to learn that material, and the stories weren't helping, I guess. And
the stories got in the way.
Yeah.
So I'm an advocate not only of intentional storytelling, but elegant storytelling. Again, if it is possible to overdo this, it's possible for the stories to be too long. It's possible for the stories to have content that isn't strategic, that isn't getting your audience to the outcome that you want to have. And it's also possible to tell stories when maybe you should be using some other mode of rhetorical persuasion. So, when we have a lot of time together, this is all the stuff that we talk about. Here's a pro tip. I see a lot of people do this. They'll start the presentation and they'll say, so thanks for coming today. We've got a lot to talk about, and I just want to start with a little story. And I do this stuff for a living, and I love stories, but when people say that, is there a part of you that goes, crap? I do that too. There's something about calling attention to the device. I tell people, don't say the S word. When you do this well, people don't know that you're using a device called storytelling to create engagement and connection. When you do this correctly, it sounds like you're just telling us what happened, but in a more intentional and engaging way. Don't say the S word. Story is invisible. It's stealth. unless you tell people that you're telling stories. So quickly, I've introduced 2 stories that you could tell. There's thousands of stories that you could be telling as part of the work that you're doing. Here's another one, the moments of impact story. You're probably already telling some of these. You know, the new feature, the new technology, we're starting to see some good results. Let me tell you about a customer. Let me tell you about a team member who said, I love the results I'm getting. And this story would suggest, don't quit, keep going. We want more of those good results, right? Here's one, we'll go farther for you. Now we're not telling stories about the technology at all. Now we're talking about team culture and the value that we bring to the table. And the Accenture cybersecurity team is talking about having a seat at the table. We're business partners, right? And so let us show you how we are helping to advance the mission of the organization. And we're doing it with care and with passion, because we love this stuff, and we will go farther for you when you engage with us. And so now we're telling stories to develop the team culture.
All right. Do they have any job openings?
At Accenture, Accenture actually does. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I've got mixed feelings. Depending on where you land, there's some Accenture teams that would probably be lovely to work with, and some, I don't know, not so much. Origin of the vision. This is a great technology story. So this new feature that we're bringing forward, do you know where this came from? We actually had a customer that had an interesting kind of security breach. Here's what happened, right? So tell the story that says there's a problem out there and we weren't ready for it. And we can't let that happen again. And that's why we're working on this new thing. So there's 5 stories that you can tell. In reality, there are thousands. And so when I work with teams, we'll use resources like the deck. This is a process called story mining. Because if you're going, hey, Dave, I love it, that sounds great, but I don't have any stories like that. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You have lots of stories like that. And so finding these stories on the team and bringing them forward and in developing them together as a team capability is a big part of the work that we do. And then how do we tell the story with impact? After we identify the story, there's a resource called the story canvas. We build the story on the canvas visually using sticky notes. And it's an archetypal structure that every culture in the world tells stories that sound like this. And this is available for free. If you send me an email or find me on LinkedIn, I'll send you a copy of this in PDF. It's a large document that you can build your stories on. And it's available in German and French and traditional Chinese and Japanese and lots of different languages. But the next step is, now that we've strategically identified a story and an outcome, how do we tell that story with impact? And then we build those stories and tell them to each other. So we're at the top of the hour. So I'm going to pause there